Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from One Rock, an economic development alliance committed to building a connected ecosystem in Greater Rochester, working to position the region to effectively compete for jobs, talent, and investment. More at oneroc.com.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Brian Sharp, in for Evan Dawson. Our connection this hour was made over generations, from Rich, the Ralph, New Era, and finally Highmark Stadium to the pages of the Democrat and Chronicle. With me today are some of the journalists who chronicled the highs and lows of the Buffalo Bills, and that place they and countless fans called home for 53 seasons. There is January 20th, 1991. The Buffalo Bills are hosting the AFC Championship against the LA Raiders, with a chance to go to their first Super Bowl. Nervous fans wondered if they would get to witness something special. What they saw was a blowout. The Bills scored 41 points in the first half, going on to win 51-3. 2 weeks later, they came within a few feet of Scott Norwood's field goal of winning the title. It was the first of 4 historic straight Super Bowl berths. But along the way and since are cherished memories. The Bills moved to a new, more modern stadium next year. This past Sunday, they played their final home game of the regular season in the Ralph. It was an emotional farewell for many, a time to relive so many memories, which we'll do here today over the next hour. My guests are Jamie Germano, photographer who retired from the Democrat and Chronicle after a 38-year career. Annette Lein, retired Democrat and Chronicle photojournalist and multimedia producer. Scott Pitoniak, a best-selling author, nationally honored journalist and longtime sportswriter. And Max Schulte, photojournalist for WXXI News. So we'll start here with a simple question. We'll go to Max first, since you're one of our folks here. What's the first memory that comes to mind about the stadium?
My first memory actually is this photo. This is, I'll get this up here. This is a 15-year-old me holding a camera in the snow with a bunch of Buffalo Jills. And this was my introduction to photography, was as a film runner and an assistant. And this was, my grandmother wrote on the back of this, December 11th, 1988, Buffalo Bills versus the LA Raiders. And so that was my introduction to being a photographer and being a working photojournalist and my aspirations to do that. But I think my first memory, real memory, I was real young. I went to a Pittsburgh Steelers game, and I was a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. So, rooting for Mean Joe Green in the stands in Buffalo was not a popular a chant. But growing up in Buffalo and experiencing the Bills and the dynasty and just what the Bills have done for Buffalo to put kind of Buffalo on the map, and also keep Buffalo, have a little bit of an ego boost, because Buffalo needed an ego boost every now and then, right? Those good times, those highs, those lows that you talked about. We seem to always come back and celebrate them as a team and come together as a community.
And Annette, how about you?
Well, and when I came here in 1989, I had never shot a professional football game before in my life. I was pretty new to being a photojournalist. And my second year here, I started covering the Bills. And in those days, we used to have 2 photographers go and share the duties. And I have never really considered myself a sports photographer, but I ended up, covering the Bills at the stadium. And I just remember, like, the first time walking in there, sort of just the expanse of a professional football stadium was really pretty overwhelming to me. And the sounds and, walking down the tunnel, like, to just walk down the tunnel was a pretty amazing thing, because that's, you sometimes be walking next to the players coming out, you'd see them coming out of the locker room. And
sometimes you'd get run over by them.
And sometimes. And, that first year that I was shooting them was the first year was the first Super Bowl. And by some bizarre luck, I ended up getting chosen with a couple other photographers to go to that Super Bowl, and so that probably that first year was a huge memories for me. And I was there for Wide Right and all of that, and so I would have to say, I felt like I was a square peg in a round hole covering professional football in this stadium. And I grew up outside of Buffalo, so I remember when the stadium opened. So just being there, in that atmosphere was pretty intimidating at first, yeah.
When you were on the field, and Annette mentioned the noise, the 80,000 people, when you were at the bottom of this fishbowl, you can feel it. It vibrates through you. You can literally feel the vibration of 80,000 people chanting. So, when Annette talks about feeling it, you literally feel it.
And I should back up. I introduced you just as WXXI's photojournalist, but you spent years at the DNC, and it was actually a conversation you had that kind of got this show together.
Well, first off, these are my mentors here. I was at the DNC as a young photojournalist, and Jamie and Annette and Scott and folks in the newsroom were very kind to me and mentored me through my career. And sorry, what was it? What was the second?
Just
part?
the conversation you had with your aunt, I believe.
So a week ago, before the last game was played, my aunt Kate from Buffalo calls me and says, "Aren't you going to the last game in the stadium?" I said, "No, I'm not." "Well, why aren't you?" she asked. And I said, "Well, that was a lifetime ago. I don't cover sports anymore. I work here as a photographer. We cover civic affairs and news in town, but we don't really cover the Bills." And that's okay. But she got me thinking, she said, "Oh, you started your career there." And I thought about this photo, and I thought about all the people who mentored me, and I thought about all the just, great experiences I had on the sidelines, the camaraderie with the other journalists, being there to witness some of these historic moments in sports. I mean, really, the Bills dynasty isn't a historic moment in sports. I think as journalists, those things kind of get lost on us because this is our job, right? This is our work environment. This is the place we go to work. And as, people who look outside, our family members, our friends who get to see what we do, it's kind of special. And I took a minute and I paused and I said, "You know what? You're right." And I said, we got to get a show together.
And Scott, you did go back for the last game. I read your column just before we came on air, talking about that decision. And I think the thing that struck me most is, as you were talking about, like we talk about a stadium, but this is a place that connects in so many ways. And like it was starting out across generations. I took my son to his first Bills game, and it was important for me to get there so he would have that memory. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about both your memories of the stadium and what it was like to go back for that last game.
Yeah, it was, stadiums are interesting places. I think as a kid, I remember my dad taking me to Yankee Stadium for the first time, the old Yankee Stadium back in 1966. And, there was just something special about being there. It was the people, it was the atmosphere. Max talks about the trembling that you feel like when there's excitement in the stadium, the roar of the crowd, and there's just something visceral about that. I was not going to go. I haven't covered the team regularly. I still write about the team for the Rochester Business Journal on occasion with columns and so forth, but I hadn't covered the team regularly since 2017. But, I was talking to my wife, Beth, and the more and more I thought about it, I go like, I've got so many memories here. From 1985 right on through to 2017 and the current day. And at the last minute, I bought a ticket. And I wanted to, it's interesting, it's the first time that I've ever gone to a game there, not going to the press box, not covering the game, not working the game. And so I got a nosebleed seat up in 317 section, which is like 27 rows up on the tunnel side of the stadium, the east side of the stadium, because I wanted to take the whole thing in. I wanted the whole vista. Plus, in the background there was the new stadium, the spaceship that's landed across Abbott Road there and stuff. And I just wanted to feel it once more, and I wanted to feel it from a different perspective, from the perspective of the fans, the way I did when I was younger. And I had just so many memories of great games and moments that raced back, through my life. It was like kind of like you're reliving a huge chunk of your life while you're there. And I saw that in the faces of fans even more, like generations who'd been there, and I talked to a bunch of them. And it's just, in a time particularly in a time like that we live in right now, where we are so divided as a people, there's just still something special, something galvanizing about a stadium and about a sporting event that can bring people together. There's very few things we have anymore in our society that bring people together and that we can kind of unite behind anymore. So there was I needed to go, and I'm glad I did, even though I really froze. But I'm glad I went, and it's a special place, and it always will be in our memories,
And Jamie, what memories have come flooding back for you this year?
I have so many memories. I mean, I started thinking about this, last week or so, and I remember the very first time I went to that stadium as a fan. I was like a teenager. It was the early 70s. O.J. Simpson was there. It was freezing out, and he's running, and he's wearing like black driving gloves, because nobody wore gloves in the early 70s, but he did. And it was electric. We were sitting way up, and my parents bought these tickets, and it was really kind of neat. And then you fast forward to working there, and Annette's right. When you walk onto the field, there's a little different feeling, and there's a little different vibe, and the sound seems different than. I'm not really sure you could describe it. Especially when it's really rocking and rolling. And we've had some of those games, that the fans have just, crushed the sound, the decibel level, gets really big, And the one thing that sticks in my head as a photographer on the sidelines, and Annette and Max might be able to remember this, but when you're in the corners of the end zone, there's not a lot of room back there. So when you see players rolling out of the end zone and stuff, it's hard on the photographers. Early in my career, when I was a little more bold, I try and hang in there a little bit more. Towards the end, I would bail in a hurry, because even the smallest NFL player,
Oh my God, yeah.
will crush you.
Thurman will crush you.
Yeah.
And if Bruce is coming back in the
my
day, get moving.
The first time you're standing next to those guys, you're like, holy crap,
Yeah, right.
they are big men.
I'm from Nebraska originally, and I remember going back with my wife now, and we were down walking on the railing by the stadium. The game had been a blowout. The backups were in, and you really realize, like, geez, these guys are huge. And then a pass comes whistling in, I should say. It's like, it moves fast. And, so
The other thing I remember, when we were covering the Bills, I would come in as an editor, and Jamie and Sean would shoot, or Annette or Jamie would shoot, and I would edit, and we'd try and communicate. And again, this fishbowl effect. If you were standing on the sideline down on the turf, you couldn't get a cell phone signal out, because everybody above you is connecting, and you're the last person trying to get out. So Jamie, I'm trying to get a hold of you. I'm trying to get yeah, man, there's no way I'm getting a cell phone signal out of here. It's just not happening. So there's these funny things that we've experienced in this place that I don't think a lot of people understand, trying to get out of the way of these players. And back in the day, they'd let you stand. Right?
Yep.
Then the NFL came in, the Bills came in and said, well, now you got to kneel. Well, we all went to Home Depot and bought knee pads. They didn't, really make knee pads. We were trying to save our knees. And so it was even, harder to get out. But the one thing is if you were looking for the other photographer across the, your teammate, we'd have one on one side and one on the other. You only really saw their head, because the crown of the field was so high, it literally cut the other person in half, just from the depth of field and looking across. So it was just things that you wouldn't know, looking down on a camera, a TV camera, everything looks flat. No, it had a crown to it.
Yeah.
And as we're reminiscing here, we want to hear from you, too. If you have a question for our guests or a memory to share, you can call 844-295-TALK. That's 844-295-8255, toll free. The local number, 585-263-9994, or email us at connections@wxxi.org. Or comment on the Connections live stream on the XXI News YouTube channel. I can spit that out there. We will be having, by the way, photos. Everybody has shared some of their favorites with us, so those will be coming up. And we're starting to get some emails. An email from Sean in Fairport. What was wrong with the old stadium? I see tearing down the old and building a new as a huge waste of resources, and if it was really necessary to tear down and replace, why were taxpayers asked to pay for it?
Oh, this is debate's been going on forever, not just here in Buffalo, but everywhere else. And there's a good point there. But as far as the stadium itself, and believe me, Buffalo Bills football, as far as I'm concerned, it will always be the Ralph. That's where my memories will go, and I know new memories will be made across the street and so forth. But there were structural issues, particularly with the upper deck. Engineers had come in, and I think they got to a point where they said that the cost of rehabbing the current stadium would not be worth it. And you were better off then to build a new one. But as far as taxpayer money, this is a whole nother issue, and I totally understand. And I do have a problem with it when you have billionaire owners in sports who hold cities hostage, in order to get, new playpens, so to speak. I totally get that. That we can do an entire show, and we have in the past about should taxpayer money go to that or not. But I think the bottom line is there were structural problems with the upper deck. Didn't know how many more years this would be safe to continue to use the stadium. So you needed to build a new one rather than the cost of rehabbing the old one. And so that's how we got there.
And just to know, I know, not to keep going back to Nebraska, but they're looking to rehab and renovate a part of the stadium. It's going to require, because you don't just build this in the off season and be ready to go. You're going to have part of your stadium shut down through one entire season. I
can give you a specific example of that just down the road. I went to Syracuse University. Archbold Stadium, this old concrete bowl, was dilapidated, and that's when they built the Carrier Dome right on the exact same site, or now the JMA Wireless Dome, whatever the corporate name is. And Syracuse had to play the entire season on the road in order for them to build on the same site where the stadium was. So, the logistics get in the way, and usually this is what happens. You build across the street on a parking lot, and then you turn the old stadium into a parking lot.
And we have a call here, Mike from Pinyan.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Hey, gentlemen, all due respect to all the guests today, I did want to just call in and say to Scott, particularly, that, talking about Bills memories, Scott, your articles about the Bills during the 90s and after, but for me, during those 90s teams, the writing that you did really, really helped kind of fill in and shape what I thought of the Bills. It made me a Bills fan, really. We went to games and watched them on TV, but I really got to tip my hat to you about all the writing that you did at that time and after.
Well, thank you. I really, really appreciate that. We had a great crew, with Sal Majorana and Leo Roth and the entire staff, and we had great photographers, and we all worked in tandem to try to tell the stories. I remember going down to Jim Kelly's hometown in East Brady, Pennsylvania, this little dot on the map, and doing a story on his roots and stuff like that. So, but I really thank you for those kind words, and it was a wonderful time. Those Super Bowl years, it was fabulous. It was a lot of fun. It really was a lot of fun. It was a lot of hard work and a lot of long hours, but man, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, we would. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, and we're still sitting up in section 332, freezing. last Sunday too.
I can appreciate it. I was in 317 this past Sunday, so I know where you're coming from.
But that's what makes a Bills fan a Bills
Yeah.
fan, right? Is
Oh,
that
you
we
gotta
endure that type of stuff, and we endured it on the sidelines with you. The guys in the press box were a little cushier, but
we
the
got some
photographers,
stories. We have some stories in the press box. Let me
you
tell
guys had to use credit cards to scrape the ice off
We
the
did.
windows, right?
That game when it was 37 below wind
Yeah.
chill and we couldn't see out the windows in the press box, we took credit cards out and you had to keep
Yeah.
scraping and defrosting it in order to see.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so we had our moments in there. It was a little cold.
Yeah, I'm sure it was cold, but we were down on the field.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you got to move around a little bit. We didn't. We
True.
were sitting
Yeah,
there.
you tried kneeling for how many hours and getting up and kneeling and getting up when it's 6 degrees.
I think they should have
And
paid
you-
you. I think Annette should have paid you guys a little bit extra for those games. So let me tell you.
One of the things I remember from those early days was, and this is the film era, is we would be developing anywhere from 100 to 180 rolls of film by hand at the stadium, and then getting those pictures on a drum or in a leaf fax, so either over a telephone line or electronic scanner that went over a telephone line. This was an endeavor in its own right, and if you've ever done it, it is stressful. It is very stressful.
and so is manually focusing.
Yes, manual focusing.
yeah.
All of these things.
that's
all
right.
of these things that a generation won't understand. But when you left at midnight or 12:30 or 1 o'clock in the morning, there were still people tailgating,
Yeah.
and it looked like a war zone. Because there were
fires.
fires,
Yeah, yeah.
and there were
The
silhouettes of people standing around, still stumbling and drinking, and you were driving out. You've got another hour ride back to Rochester, and you're looking at these folks, and you're like, man, the humanity.
Wondering what was or who was the best player to interview or to work with, and who was the worst?
Let's see. Well, one of my all-time favorites was Kent Hull. He was a center on the Super Bowl teams. If you wanted to go-to guys, usually go to an offensive lineman. They don't get, you only hear about them when they make mistakes and stuff, but they're like the heart and soul usually of a football team, and they're stand-up people. So win, lose, or draw. And Kent just had a way about him. He was from Mississippi. He was a really, really bright guy. And he just had a folksy way of providing perspective during those years. Now, the Super Bowl years, those teams had incredible egos. Kelly and Thurman Thomas and Bruce Smith. And I think one of the great jobs that Marv Levy ever did was to keep those egos under control. If you had a strict taskmaster, I think that team would have imploded. And thankfully there wasn't social media back then, or that team really would have imploded. But I think Kent Hull, Darryl Talley was another guy from that era. And Marv Levy was my all-time favorite as far as a coach or a manager. Marv he had a self-deprecating sense of humor. He was a brilliant guy. You always learn something. Like Leo Roth, my colleague, always said, every press conference you learn something from Marv Levy. As far as difficult guys, Bruce Smith was very difficult to deal with. Bruce could be, he would go on these silence strikes where he would just not talk to local reporters. But it was funny, like Bills go play a Monday night game in New York, where all the New York press and national press is there. All of a sudden, you couldn't shut him up. You couldn't shut the guy up because he knows, Pro Bowl votes and this and that, and, national publicity and whatever. But Bruce could be very, very difficult to deal with among the Super Bowl year players.
All right. I think we're going to take our only break of the hour, and we'll be back after this.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Mary Cariola Center, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson, believing an informed and engaged community is a connected one. marycariola.org.
Being shattered.
So you guys have talked about some of this, but, new stadiums are like palaces, but the older stadiums, not as cushy. How did this stadium rate on that scale? And did that allow you to be closer, as you mentioned, to the players?
I will say this about how the photographers had to handle some of this. We went through some iterations of where we could work. In the beginning, most of us drove back to the office. Then there became a time when we would go up in a box somewhere, and AP would develop film, and we would transmit from there. Then when we became digital, they put the photographers. I don't know if you remember, Annette. We had a trailer. It was outside of the stadium, so we would have to come and go through security both times to come and we'd go up the tunnel, past the locker rooms. We'd have to go outside to this trailer that leaked and work in there. They had very, very little heat. They had like little portable warmers in the corner, and we would have to run back and forth. And then when we came back in, we'd have to go through security again, taking all your metal out and stuff. And it was pretty dumb. That was archaic, even by the visiting press. And the visiting press would come in and go, what is this? They're used to probably what's there now is in a legit media room for the photographers. Just inside the tunnel, you make a quick turn and you're in. You've got tables, you've got spaces, they've got, internet connection, they got all that stuff. But just before that, it was almost undoable. The only good thing about that was they didn't check your bags a lot, so you could bring in a beers or whiskey or something if you wanted to, and we'd have them in the trailer. So after games, you could cocktail while you edit. And I did do that. Of course.
I never got to do that.
There was I remember getting back to the whiskey. When they had this kind of we could stand, and then the kneeling mandate. Well, there were some photographers who didn't take too kindly to that, and if you stood with a long lens, you could stand against the wall in the end zone. So there were photographers who did that, and what they would do is their head would just be a little bit above the wall and in front of the folks who had that. So, a fifth of, Mad Dog or Wild Irish Rose really went far with the fans that you stood in front of. And if you, stuck one of those in and handed that to the folks behind you, you were golden. They took care of you. You need hot hands? What do you need? Are you cold? We got an extra blanket up. What do you want? It's true Buffalo hospitality.
Scott, what was your favorite, area or part of the stadium? Maybe outside of the press box?
That's a good question. They had a pretty. They renovated the locker room. The home team locker room was quite spacious, unlike the visiting locker room, which was like a high school locker room. You had to jump over people and their equipment and stuff like that. The locker room was quite spacious, and you could. The thing, everything changed. Back in those days, I could pull Jim Kelly aside, or I could pull somebody aside when I was working on a specific column or whatever that had a different angle that I didn't want other people to have. And so there was enough room and enough maneuvering you could do where you could pull somebody aside. So from a selfish reporter standpoint who wants good quotes and an unusual, unique story, I would go through that. I think, one of the places I did like was the tunnel. There was something interesting about that tunnel. And I remember when the Bills clinched in 1988 and they tore the goalposts down, the fans had flooded the field and stuff. We all watched from the tunnel. And it was just incredible scene you were watching unfold from there. And there could be some, Brian Cox and I forget with the Bills, like there could be some fisticuffs going on because both teams had to go up this narrow tunnel. But there was something cool about that I liked that. And even going to practices, walking down that tunnel, and then as Annette had mentioned before, like you get out there and you see this incredible expanse. And I think you really appreciate the enormity of everything there and what this means. You got a tremendous perspective on the stadium at that point.
And so right outside that tunnel is where the players park their cars and the visiting team would come and unload their bus. So the fisticuffs also, would go out into that. But, you would get to see, these players getting out and coming in. And in the early days, one of the things that I did was I assisted for Sports Illustrated. Well, Sports Illustrated shot chrome. Okay, they didn't shoot negative. They didn't process there. They shipped everything back to New York that night. So we had to catch a FedEx plane. We had to drive the chrome to the Buffalo airport and get it on a FedEx plane. Well, the car that we were using was blocked in, and we couldn't get the stuff out. So I think I had like $20 on me. There was a tow truck parked there to make sure that nobody was screwing around. I paid the guy $20. I think I moved a player's car. I don't remember what it was, but gave this guy $20. I got to get this car. He moved the car over, put that car in the spot that I was in, and I got to the airport and got the film out.
You mentioned about the tunnel and the buses coming in, the visiting teams. There's some great stories there too, like especially when Tom Brady and the Patriots came to town, or when Dan Marino and the Dolphins came to town. They'll tell you stories about the fans as it's coming down one Bills Drive and making that turn to get to the tunnel and stuff. There would be people throwing snowballs. If the bus was stopped, they would fans would be pushing and rocking that bus and stuff like that. There were some interesting stories that went on for visiting teams that came through, as particularly ones that weren't beloved, such as Tom Brady's Patriots.
And there was honestly nothing better than bad weather games.
Nothing better.
Nothing better. To a photographer, big snow made great pictures, and people throwing snowballs, and even if you were, you couldn't feel your hands out there, but it was magical. Bad weather made just amazing pictures.
I think some of Jamie's best photos are from those games because the struggle is real, right?
Yeah.
You watch these guys, and so you're looking for, as a sports photographer, you're looking for action, but you're looking for reaction. You're looking for action from the fans. All of these things. Yeah, there's some of Jamie's pictures right now, but that's not easy to work in this environment and make this stuff. This isn't just anybody can do this. You have to have a stamina and a tolerance for pain, and also be creative and have an eye and have a photojournalistic sense about you, and keep your head on a swivel at all times.
You're carrying a lot of gear.
Yeah,
that game that they just showed, the one with LaShawn McCoy scoring.
Oh, the
in overtime.
Snowvertime game.
So, Annette had mentioned manual focus, but that game, the snowflakes were so big that you couldn't use autofocus. You had to turn off auto. Now, we grew up on manual focus, so it wasn't terrible, but we got used to it the last 15, 20 years. Autofocus got way better. But that night, I had to go back and shoot manual focus all over again, and it was a challenge. A little bit different.
The fandom.
The funny thing about that too is, real quick, on my way after I left that game, there was so much snow, and I'm hoofing it back to my car, and I got cameras and computers and stuff, and I'm slugging it, and there's a facilities guy drives by in a ATV, and he says, "Hey, you want to ride?" And I said, "Absolutely." Right? So I hop in. He drives me to my car, and I'm so glad I did, because when I got to my car, it was overtaken by this snow drifts that I couldn't have gotten out. He happened to have a shovel in the back of his thing, and I had to shovel myself out of the car, out of that parking spot. And there was nobody around at that point. It was like 4 hours after the game or something, and it would have been just me with my hands just kind of digging the snow out. So luckily this guy was here, and he still had to rock the car, and he gave me a little push to get it going, but that was now it wasn't overly cold, just those big snowflakes, and a lot of it.
The Fandemonium photo referenced the blowout and the goalpost coming down. That photo, I think, might be one of the only pictures of that event, because the day was so cold that everybody's cameras just locked up and the battery started dying. And I believe the photographer who made that had shoved a camera in his coat pocket with warmers, keeping it warm, just for that moment. Okay, when they won,
we kept the film inside of our pockets with warmers.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you would get like
and so
static on your pictures.
I don't think that picture would exist of that goalpost being tore down if that camera wasn't kept warm.
One of the things I loved about that photo, and again, we were there in the tunnel watching this all occur, is that you had, 15, 20,000 people on the field at that time. And because of the cold, like you just saw like the steam coming up. I mean, it was just an ethereal, feel to that photograph and stuff. And he really captured it, because I can remember being in a tunnel looking at that and just saying like, and even the players came out of the locker room to watch this. It was just such an, it was Buffalo. It really was. It was such an incredible moment. It's still one of my favorite moments being in that place.
I think that's kind of the argument. We can argue whether or not the money is well spent or it's responsible. But, a town like Buffalo, and having grown up there, listen, Buffalo needs the Bills. Okay, Rochester needs the Bills. We need to have something to rally around. I think we go back, Scott made a really good point about, coming together as a community and setting differences aside and being in one place to root for the home team, right? And, I don't know. I think it would be hard to argue, a value on that and an importance to a community that, look at the 60s, 70s, and 80s were not very kind to Buffalo. Buffalo's kind of had a resurgence, and yes, there is some things, but, there's still some working class people in that town who deserve to have something like this, there in their community. It is a dynasty. It is an established, team that has roots and history and generation. I think you opened the show. It's generational history. You brought your son to the first game this year. You're not the only one. And, I think it's important that, that perspective is also kind of, taken into account, talking about what this team really does mean for that community and Rochester.
I think the the taxpayers in Buffalo clearly get their money back from the Bills.
I think there's definitely a more of a reward than a yeah.
We're going to look at a few more photos here that you guys took, and for our listeners, if one of these comes up and it's yours, if you could also describe, just for people who are not able to see what they're seeing up here, of some of your favorite memories.
Oh my God!
Or you can watch on the YouTube live stream.
Okay, so this is at the first Super Bowl, and that is me on the sideline not shooting as Thurman Thomas is running by me. This ended up in Sports Illustrated the week after the game, and I forget who called me and said, "Have you seen Sports Illustrated?" And I'm like, "No." And they said, "Well, you might want to take a look." And this is wide right, of course. It's like the picture of the moment. I know it's not like a very exciting picture, but it's the moment, right after he kicks it. And then there was a frame or two after that where he stands and he just puts his head down. And
it's a storytelling picture, clearly.
And everybody was stunned. I was like, oh my God, we came down here for a whole week and we did all these things and this was so exciting. And oh my God, he didn't make it. And we had to go into the locker room right afterward. And I remember walking in there thinking, okay, I really have got to make. I knew I had that picture. And this is actually one of the AFC championship. That's Bruce Smith after on the field after one of the. I forget. I think that was.
Describe what it looks like for folks who are just listening. And these photos, by the way, real quick, will also be available on the website.
This is on the field. This is Bruce Smith with his arms outstretched, just like looking to the heavens, and
a giant smile.
And they had just won the AFC championship. I think it was '93 or '94. I can't remember which year.
It looks like '93 grain.
Yeah, old black and white. We were still shooting black and white then. This is actually the same year. This is Jim Kelly talking to media. I think it was after that game.
Just surrounded by.
So you must have been in the stands for that? That couldn't have been just a wide Hail Mary picture.
I was on the field. I remember it was crazy, kind of running around on the field. This is me in.
Minnesota, was that?
No, that was in Atlanta. For the '93 Super Bowl. I got to go to 2. Go figure. And what was fun about going to Atlanta, this is me, much younger me, with very old photo gear, manually focusing, manually focusing then. Myself and another female photographer got sent, Melissa Mahan and I got sent, and we were so excited to be like 2 women getting sent, to go to the Super Bowl. We were very excited. So, and I don't know who's this.
This is not the Super Bowl.
This is not the Super Bowl.
This is a streaker.
Yeah. So this is probably the only thing we could show in the paper. There was more.
More.
Or I should say less, but,
Man wrapped
one of the few times
strategically
that
in
that a streaker actually made a really fun photo.
If I'm not mistaken, because I think we used this in one of our stories, that the Bills had a tough day that day, and I think this was a better hit than any of the Bills had made that day. I think one of us used that line.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Just Josh
Allen.
Josh doing what Josh does. He's a hard guy not to like, as a player and as a person. Not that I know him so well and that, we don't go out for beers together, but the few times that you've interacted with him, he's just a class act, and his play has improved so much. I don't know that Scott probably remember his rookie year. You could tell he was talented, but he was so raw that he was a project in the beginning, and it was a project that actually worked out unbelievably.
I remember when he was in college, because, like I say, grew up in Nebraska. So Nebraska actually played Wyoming. He has there was a play where the first game that he played, Nebraska was a much better team at that time. Picked him off something like 3 times. And the last one, they intercepted it, and the Nebraska player ran up and handed him the ball. And Allen just threw it back at the Nebraska player, and a flag was thrown, and it was unsportsmanlike conduct against Nebraska. But I remember his last year, he was like stiff-arming people into the ground, and I'm like, yeah, that's the guy that you need.
Yeah, these are back in the Super Bowl era, too. Andre Reed, who's a Hall of Famer, and, it was just fun to be around back then. Because you got a lot of these types of things. And there'll be some black and white. We used to shoot a lot of black and white. This was early color for us, and it was.
What's great about that photo too, Jamie, is like Sunday they went back to the red helmets.
Yes,
and that brought everything back.
It did, and that was it.
That's a great combination.
Yeah, that uniform. Right.
His photo is you have Kelly running up and Reed is spiking the ball.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's Jamie. Yeah.
So during COVID, a lot of people probably didn't realize, but they made photographers shoot from the stands. So this is me from the stands, and if you wanted to move around, you just walked through the seats and you shot that way. Now, it's eerily quiet. You could hear the players. There's some language that we could not hear on the field because of all the fans there, but when there's no fans there, that language is very available to all of us, and I felt like I kind of loved it because it was more grassroots football to me, and so it was a fun time. Jim Kelly getting sacked by the Colts, nice old black and white, kind of the things that we did back then. Who was
Jimmy Richer?
Is that
51?
Okay.
Jimmy Richer.
Okay.
He became a commercial airline pilot after his career.
I did not know that. Yeah.
Good guy.
Yeah.
And that's
How many
the,
games would
Jim
each
Kelly
of
knee
you?
brace.
How many
Right.
games would each of you say you've been to? And Ralph.
You got to be the winner.
I mean, Jamie's
Well, I
got
don't know.
the
He's
Jamie
probably
and
been
Scott.
through a lot. I don't know.
You
I
might
mean,
be more than me.
I pretty much have done them the last 10 years or so, 15, so probably I didn't really travel with them that much, so I'd probably do the math,
We talked about a lot of, the good, you talked about why wide right. But what are the hardest memories that you guys had of particularly being in that stadium?
I have one real quick, but maybe not real quick. I was at the Houston game, the comeback game, when there was still the Houston Oilers. Back then, we were shooting film. To make deadline, somebody has to leave early, collect everybody's film. Somebody leaves early. We get film developed, so when the photographers, the other two photographers come back, they have something to start working on while they do their end of the game stuff. I was chosen to do this. We kind of did a drawing or something, and I lost. So, the game's a little out of hand. I'm thinking I'm in good shape. And then something kind of changed just before I left. They started scoring. The vibe changed. The crowd changed, and I could kind of sense it. And I waited as long as I could before I had to go back. But I collected everybody's film, and I'm walking out of the stadium, and there's nobody because nobody left, and it's just me walking to my car. At the time, we parked in somebody's yard. And I could hear the crowd going crazy out, and I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm leaving. And literally, I get in the car, I'm driving back, I turn the radio on the thing in the car driving back, and all I could hear is score after score after score, and I'm like, oh my God, and then I'm basically walking into the DNC building with my head down going, this film is worthless because we're not going to use any of this, and it was like, so every January 3rd, right? Is that when it was? January 3rd, 93. Every January 3rd, I get this like headache or something, just kind of like, oh my God, because they always brought it up. Oh, the biggest comeback. Yeah. And I was like, oh, it was a bad memory. Obviously, to this day, I'm still thinking about it.
I don't really have any bad memories per se. Getting back to looking at the photos and Jamie and Annette's pictures and this is before this is before Instagram and Facebook, and this is before the Bills hired their own photography and video team. So when these pictures were published in the paper along Scott's article, whether it was the Buffalo News or Rochester or Syracuse or wherever, these were really the only documented photos that were generated from that game. So the players wanted these pictures. So there was a barter system for autographs and a little quid pro quo, in the tunnel or back in the press box or up in the dark room. Kelly, Thurman, these guys would, find you on the sidelines. They knew who these photographers were. Oh, I saw that picture. Can I get a print of that? When they moved the to Fisher for the training camp, who was the owner at the time?
Ralph Wilson.
Ralph Wilson came, and Ralph was elderly. He was brought in on a golf cart, and he steps. So I'm kind of sidetracking here, and he steps out and he tips his hat to the crowd, and I made this picture, and it was a great photo of Ralph with the crowd and him tipping his hat. And I remember getting a phone call from his wife the next day after the picture published. Can you send me that? This is the best picture I've ever seen of Ralph. So people paid attention and were wanting to connect with photographers, and the public connected with Scott in a way that, really did kind of tell the story of what happened there every Sunday.
It was a different era.
It was a
the
different
newspapers really drove
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
narrative at that time.
We got a question. Did Kodak assist with any of the photography support at the stadium?
Kodak would bring in film for us to try, and I would listen to arguments as to why the Fuji looked better. I could get into more detail, but we got 5 minutes, and I don't want to disparage our hometown Kodak, but the Kodak would send techs and reps, and they would try and work with the professionals and provide film. But no, we hand processed all of our film. The Associated Press had their own darkroom. Reuters had their own darkroom. So if you were from out of town, you contracted with one of those agencies and they processed your film. So AFC Championship game, the LA paper would send, 6 photographers, and you would hand roll each of their rolls of film plus the Reuters staff and whoever else needed something done. The AP would have, 2 techs in a darkroom.
Just bring this back around to the stadium. Rob, actually here from the booth. Part of what made it emotional for me is that I have a lot of close friends and loved ones that were fans and season ticket holders that have passed away. Great emotional memories. And I think that was something, Scott, and we'll finish with you. As I was reading your column, I was thinking about, again, where I grew up and going back to that stadium. I said to Max before this, like going back after not having been back for so many years, I remember feeling like it was like going to church. It was going to somewhere that was kind of like your home because you had memories of going there with your dad. You had memories of family members who this is where their seats were. This is what that game was when you were however years old. I guess what does a stadium mean?
It's a place where memories are made. It's a repository of memories. You keep making memories. It's a place where friendships are made. You'd be surprised the number of people who are sitting in the same clusters, the same seats, who went to respective families' weddings, bar mitzvahs, birthdays, funerals. So it's important. And I saw a lot of people crying, bawling their eyes out the other night. It was a celebration of life, really, saying goodbye to an old friend, an old special place. And that's the power of these sporting venues. We've seen it for generations here in Buffalo.
All right, Scott, Jamie, Max, Annette, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, man.
Thank you.
All right, go Bills.
Go Bills.
Go Bills.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.